questions we wrestle with as Christians about who God is, how do we live out our faith, what is the Bible, what is the truth of the Bible, what are we supposed to believe, how are we supposed to live. There are really big, deep questions that we ask each other, that we ask God, that we wrestle with ourselves. And that's why the Cultivate podcast exists, to help us go deeper in our understanding of who God is, His Word, and the way that He's called us to live. Hey everyone, welcome to the Cultivate podcast through the Grove Church. I'm Charlie Lofton, the lead pastor there, and we have Abigail here.
Yeah.
Deaconess of, the Grove Church.
Okay. I like it.
Yeah.
I take care of feeding people.
Well, it's a broad term. It means servant.
Okay.
Someone who kind of serves the church.
That should be true of me.
Yeah. There you go.
There you go.
It's actually a role, and that is.
But we don't have them.
Not formally, right? And so so that is kind of a lead into what we're talking about today. We're in our systematic theology study. We've been talking about the theology of the church, which is called
ecclesiological. That
is the noun form. That is I guess
ecclesiology.
That's the adjective. Yeah, ecclesiology is the noun. That's really good. It's really good. And we talked a little bit just kind of about what the church is, and then kind of focused in last time on kind of the mission of the church. And I kind of made a lot of promises for this one that we're not going to be able to fulfill. And then I told you that you're going to decide how many weeks we keep doing this.
We'll do more.
But let's just kind of start with kind of walking our way through a little bit of church history to help answer the question, why do we have all these different sorts of churches with all these different sorts of structures?
Yeah.
Ultimately, I'd like to talk about what is the difference between an elder and a deacon and a pastor and a presbyter or a bishop.
Never
and
heard
all
that word.
That's where
presbyter,
like Presbyterian.
But that's like a role, a presbyter.
That is actually the transliteration of the word that often gets translated elder. It's just another word for elder.
Interesting. Really. I'm going to call our elders that this
week. The presbyters?
Yes.
Yeah. And talk about all of those different sorts of things and why this church votes, and they have a lead pastor, and this one has elders, and the staff work for the elders, and they all these different sorts of structures of all these different ways to kind of implement these leadership principles. So I want to talk about these leadership roles, but I feel like before we even get into that, it's like there's just so much diversity. Yeah, let's get a little history, all right?
I love history.
So we work our way through the book of Acts, right? And we're just starting to see...
You're starting there?
Isn't that where the church history starts?
Well, what about before Jesus? Is there no church?
Right. The church is strictly a New Testament construct.
Okay.
It is something that Jesus built.
Okay.
I will build my church.
Okay.
Right. And so if you want to have a good discussion about the difference between the church and Israel and why Jesus felt like he needed to build something different rather than just why put a different structure together.
Was there a weekly gathering in the Old Testament?
You have
put that in my Q&A
already asked that question.
I know, but I feel like you didn't really get into it. I
said yes. And then you said on a particular day, and I said yes,
on Sabbath. But then now you're saying church didn't start until New Testament, though. That sounds like church in the Old Testament. Does it not?
I've
stumped him.
Have you been here the whole time?
Yeah, but do you
right here?
Yeah, but do you not see what I'm saying?
But yes, I feel like we're coming around in a circle. The people in the Old Testament could not be Jesus's church because they are people who have been called out of the world to be followers of Jesus.
Yeah.
So they didn't exist. There were no followers of Jesus before Jesus came to earth.
Okay.
Right.
You didn't say that part.
So we're talking about, we've got these people that, were chosen by God, right? God's chosen people, and they, all the Old Testament history, and they were a group of people that followed God.
Okay.
And then Jesus, both from that and from the world at large, said, I'm going to call out a group of people to be my people.
Okay.
Forgiven by me, following me. And so some of those people came from Israel. Some of those people came from the Gentile world. And a new thing was started, Acts chapter 2, at the day of Pentecost, right?
That was a great intro to your history lesson.
Okay.
Glad we got there.
Okay. Yes. And so it starts there. 3,000 people come to faith on Pentecost.
Mhm.
And that's where we get to that Acts 2 passage that we looked at last week of, and they dedicated themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and to prayer. And then their numbers grew day by day. And then we follow through the book of Acts. We start to see, the thing with the deacons and the feeding, and we got to create some structures here because we're not doing a good job feeding people. And then you see the church expanding beyond just a group of people there in Jerusalem, but to the outlying areas. And now it's not just people who have a Jewish religious
Jerusalem
background.
is where Pentecost happened. Okay.
And it starts going to the outlying areas of Israel, and then starts expanding to people who don't have a Jewish background at all. It starts expanding to people from Samaria, and it starts to go from there to just well outside the borders of Israel to all of these different Roman provinces.
Then you could point at the map.
We have so many people who mostly listen. It would be,
I know,
the more visual this became, the more problematic I think it would be for our commuters and joggers.
That's fair.
But the YouTube guys,
they would love it.
They would love
Just
it.
A quick
No,
little
they don't love anything.
That's fair.
They don't love anything.
They're mainly haters.
And then, you fast forward a couple of decades and you start getting to those later letters of Paul where he's writing to Timothy, and we just start seeing more and more structures being put on the church in order for it to be able to function properly. Is this one thing that you can do when you're a group of just a handful of people to, we're a lot of people, but we're in one place to, we are lots of people in lots of different places. We've become a regional movement to slowly becoming a worldwide movement. And how do each individual churches, how do they structure and govern themselves, and how do they interface with churches from other parts of their city, their town, their region, the other parts of the world?
So when you say early church, this is always what you're referring to?
Most people, when they refer to the early church, they are talking about the book of Acts.
Okay.
Kind of the
first time period.
First, second generation of followers of Jesus post Pentecost.
Okay.
And so by the time we get done with the New Testament, we're starting to see some functional structures that kind of help churches govern themselves. And then, you have your first council there in Acts 15 where they're trying to figure out what Old Testament laws should we still be trying to follow, because we got these Gentiles who don't follow any of it. And how do we answer that question? And so even in that, you're starting to see the foundation of some beginning structures that are coming later. And so then over the next, say, 300 years, you start seeing the appointment of what's called bishops, people who, I'm going to take leadership over a collection of churches in a particular region.
Okay.
And then anytime that there was a theological conflict or something like that, they would call these councils together
of the bishops.
Yeah, of these bishops to come together to, talk out these issues, come to a resolution, write essentially a position paper on it, and take it back to their regions, to their individual churches. So
it feels like all these structures are more so to contain growth, not to divide into different factions.
Yeah, to keep the capital C church
united, or
as we have more and more little C churches with vastly different backgrounds and vastly different cultures. How do we keep unity amongst so much regional and cultural diversity?
Yeah.
And so a lot of these structures were built out of necessity as opposed to biblical mandates for regional bishops and church-wide councils.
So they would meet and agree on something.
Yes.
Okay.
They came together on whether or not they believed that Jesus was fully divine, whether or not he was fully human.
Okay.
What about the Holy Spirit? What is the nature of the Trinity? Certain sort of heresies would pop up within certain churches, and they would come together to, this is kind of infecting all of our churches. What do we think about this? Is this the kind of thing where we can agree to disagree on, or is this the kind of thing we're going to call it heresy?
They didn't even have the Bible for this, did they?
Oh yeah. By the time depends on what you mean by that.
Like, did they have sections of
Paul's letters
scriptures
in the Gospels were being widely circulated by this time.
and they would use that as like teaching text?
Yeah, and maybe not everybody had a version of every book.
But they had things to teach from.
But how the New Testament got assembled was put together by several of these councils.
Okay.
Which of these, we've got all these books that we use to teach with to kind of help us know and connect with what the apostles thought. Which ones do we all agree are trustworthy, which we talked about in our bibliology section when we started this back in 2007.
Yeah.
And so you see these structures really, again, being built out of necessity. And kind of one of the big turning points in church history was a guy named Constantine.
Wait, did they have pastors in those places?
Yeah. I mean, Timothy was a pastor. In Ephesians 4, Paul says, these pastors are one of the original spiritual gifts he's talking about. And those, typically in their world, a teacher and a pastor were two different things. Teacher is someone who instructs. A pastor is someone who provides care. We have combined those roles really into one.
Which one was
job.
Timothy?
Again, it's those are two different gifts that maybe the same person has.
Oh, okay.
Right. He was kind of he was considered kind of a leader, an elder of that church. And so you can tell from reading those books, 1st and 2nd Timothy, that he had both of those gifts. Okay. Right. And even if you only have one of those gifts, if you're a leader in a church, like I'm really just a teacher. This doesn't mean you're not supposed to care for people.
Excuse.
And if you're a leader and it's like, I'm a real caring guy. No, you still have.
Right. Yeah.
Great Commission says we're all supposed to teach.
Right. Okay.
Anyways, Constantine, he was one of the Roman emperors, and he, up until that point, essentially Christianity was an underground movement, really a subversive movement.
Okay.
It was not state sponsored in any way. In fact, there was a lot of persecution for those first 300 years or so. Mm-hmm. And then Constantine made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire.
That's big.
Late 4th century is when this happens.
Big, right?
It's huge.
Okay.
When you move from a place of just kind of you're growing through persecution versus now you are an established religion, there's a lot of good that comes from that. There's a lot of challenges that come from that. But
was he a Christian?
He became a Christian,
and then
whether or not he was a Christian, like he really put his faith in Jesus, or this was just a political move on his part.
Okay,
is a question for historians, not for a random Charlie on a
right.
So
okay,
and so then that kind of really kind of established the church more, gave it just a lot more legitimacy in the world, right?
Did that mean that it was like the mandated religion to follow, or they just like recognized it as fine?
It didn't switch immediately. That then, if you're not a Christian, you used to persecute us, but now we're the real deal. Now we're going to persecute you. It eventually became that, but that was not immediately.
Okay, there's just one of the fine options,
right? And so now the movement is spreading. And the Christian movement now has this legitimacy within the Roman Empire, but also is starting to exist outside of the Roman Empire. Mm-hmm. And so what is happening then is, as it becomes an established political entity, now it's finding its kind of political center at the same place that the capital of the Roman Empire is. And so it became a political movement of sorts. And so now the leadership of the church is working very closely with the governmental leadership, which in the Roman Empire would have been in the city of
Rome.
Yes. And do you know what religion still currently has its center there? And
Catholics?
The Catholics,
okay.
Right.
Okay.
That, so the Vatican City is in Rome, right?
Okay.
And so this is kind of where that really begins. And so it switches from kind of Jerusalem being the center point of the Christian movement, and through this movement towards being a more established part of the Roman Empire, the
What do you
political.
mean by that?
What do you mean?
What do you mean it became like a part of like the political, like politics?
You became the state-sponsored religion.
Okay.
When you're a state-sponsored religion, now you're not something that is fighting the government or just kind of separate from the government. Now you work with it.
Okay.
And so now the leadership center moves from Jerusalem more towards Rome. And now they're starting to establish leaders of the overall church. So we got all these bishops overseeing regions, and now centered in Rome, there is somebody who
the Archduke
oversees everybody. No, there's actually a much more common word for that, for the one person who oversees all of the entire church and lives in Rome.
Oh, that's Catholic.
And his name is?
The Pope.
Or not his name. Right, the Pope. So Catholics would say that the first Pope was Peter, which kind of traced the lineage of popes all the way back to there. And that usually he was the first bishop of Rome, and then all the bishops of Rome. That's a little bit, you kind of got to squint your eyes a little bit to kind of make that work. But I'm not here on this day to fight Catholics about this. But really what we would call the modern day capital P Pope really kind of started around that time.
Okay.
But as the church begins to expand beyond the Roman Empire out into, what would be called Western Asia, Eastern Europe, like Ukraine, Turkey, Russia, those sorts of things. Now, there's becoming another kind of leadership kind of place there in Istanbul,
not Constantinople,
which would have been Constantinople at the time, right? As the Roman
that's
Empire
what that
is
song
getting
means.
bigger and bigger, and you got this Western thing over here and this Eastern thing over here in the Eastern part of the Roman Empire. And there's starting to be a lot of divisions here. And just because you're all part of the Roman Empire and you're over here in the East in Constantinople and you're over here in the West in Rome, you see things very different culturally, politically. And as the Roman Empire began to kind of break apart, there just kind of became a real division between the East and the West here.
Okay.
And what we call modern day Turkey, when it became Muslim, right? That's when Constantinople became Istanbul. So then around the mid 11th century, so in the around 1045, around there is 1045, 1053, and that range, a thing called the Great Schism, which divided the church into two different groups, what we would now modern day call the Catholics and the Orthodox Church.
Wait, can I ask a real quick question before we go further? Were you saying that there's like a Catholic Pope and then there's a non-Catholic Pope, or those were the same?
It's the same.
Okay.
It's the same.
Okay.
This was, but back then, all the way up until this schism in 1053, there was only just the church.
Okay.
There wasn't Catholic and not Catholic.
Okay.
There was just the church.
So Catholics were also persecuted?
Well, there was no what you would call Catholics.
Okay.
There was just Christians.
Okay.
There was just Christians, and there was no need to, well, what type of Christian are you?
Okay.
There was just...
So the Pope was just over all those people?
Yeah, over everybody.
Okay.
And there really weren't groups that said that they were followers of Jesus.
And that was the first time they had a Pope?
Depends on who you ask. So
I'm asking you.
I'm saying, well, I think it's more complicated than there's always been a pope, which is what Catholics would want to say.
Right.
But at what point was the Bishop of Rome really kind of universally recognized as the leader of the church? That's something that slowly evolved over a period of years as Christianity is gaining more and more legitimacy and political power within the Roman Empire as a whole. By the time you get to Constantine, everybody agrees that that's definitely a pope.
Yeah. Okay.
There is definitely a one clear leader that
over
oversees all of the church.
Okay.
But then over the next several centuries, both politically and culturally, the Western part of the Holy Roman Empire and the Eastern part were starting to have a lot of friction. And so mostly around cultural differences, but there were also some theological differences that if I tried to explain them to you, you would be like, that, like you would think that that's like would be so minor. You cannot imagine that the first real church split came over whether or not the Holy Spirit was sent by God the Father or was sent by God the Father and Jesus.
Oh.
By adding and Jesus, that upset the people in the East so much that was one of the things they had to divide over, right? We're not okay. And so again, cultural differences, power differentials, and some what we would consider, but they would not, minor theological differences. There became this split that exists to this day. Orthodox churches exist primarily in Russia, Ukraine, Egypt, Turkey and these areas. And then where those people live, and even in European or even in the US, there's some Orthodox churches here, but they tend to be, well, this is just where all the...
You're really challenging my geography right now to piece it together in my mind, but I'm tracking.
And so we existed kind of in what we would call really kind of two churches. And Egypt kind of through all of that was also kind of branching itself out in what was called the Coptic Church.
Did they still think of each other as Christians?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I mean, they didn't like each other.
Okay.
But there was no, I mean, there was so much geographical distance,
right?
That didn't really matter that much. But they weren't friends. They weren't going to do service projects together or anything,
right?
And it exists like that all the way up until the time of Martin Luther.
Okay.
And what has become the Protestant Reformation.
Was that like a really long gap?
Now we're in the 1500s.
Okay.
And from Martin Luther's perspective, the church as a political entity had just gotten too corrupt and had lost touch with the scriptures.
Yeah.
And he had this list of grievances that he called the 57 Theses, and he wrote them out.
That's bold.
Hammered it to the door of the Catholic Church and was just like, but the big kind of rallying cries is that we are saved only by faith, not works. It's not by, it's only by faith. It's only by grace. And our only authority is the scripture, not tradition or this Pope, but it's like the scripture tell us. And so his goal was never to start what, quote, a new denomination.
Right.
He was trying to reform.
Correct. Yeah.
But then it was after a period of time where it was like, okay, we got to kick this guy out.
But like all these places heard about him.
Oh yeah. I mean, it became a huge movement.
Okay.
And
where was
if
he?
we ever wanted to do a church history,
now I do
series, we could go on. This is really difficult.
Where was he though?
He was a German.
Would that be
modern day Germany?
Eastern?
Whether or not Germany is Eastern or Western, Western Europe. It's kind of more Central Europe, but anyways.
But with these two churches,
he would have been Catholic.
Okay.
Well, really, kind of everything that happens next kind of happens within the Catholic side here.
And then okay.
And so ultimately, they decided to kick him out. And the Catholic Church had what was called the Counter-Reformation to kind of speak to his concerns, but without really making the structural changes that he thought was necessary. And so his goal was not to start a denomination, but he got kicked out. And so
was he a pastor?
A movement kind of got built around him. Let's just say yes.
Okay.
And out of this, then this is when... Why do we have all these denominations? It starts here. It starts here with this group of people that got kicked out of the Catholic Church because they decided we didn't want to reform in the ways you want us to reform. Were they going to be able to unify around their own new set of principles?
Right.
At the same time, we've got the advent of the printing press.
Yeah.
So for the longest time,
technology.
Can this large group of people build a unifying principle? Meanwhile, for the first time in history, everybody has access to their own Bible. At this point, you had no idea what the Bible said. Right. The only way you knew what the Bible said was you had it read to you. And whether or not, and this is what this means. And they're reading it to you in Latin, and you don't speak Latin. And then they tell you in your language what it means.
They would translate it.
And so they would read it in Latin, and you'd be like, and then they would tell you what it meant, and you'd be like, okay. And so you didn't have access.
Okay.
And so now,
this is kind of like a great
now
releasing.
everybody's got this group of people have gotten kicked out, and now a whole lot of people have access to the Bible and what they think it means. And with the access to information, and the internet has taught us this again, with the access to information becomes just a lot of individual, different sorts of ideas.
Right.
And so what really kind of came out of the Protestant Reformation is this group kind of got broken down into three different groups. What we'll call modern day Lutherans, the Reformed movement, modern day Presbyterians and Calvinists, and Anabaptists, which the connection between Anabaptists and Southern Baptists is a little sticky, but let's just say Anna as in again. Oh, they baptized people again because you weren't. It wasn't enough to be baptized as a baby. You needed to be baptized as a believer. Anna, again, baptized people. They were baptizing people a second time after having been baptized as a baby. So you've got Lutherans, Calvinists, Presbyterians, and Baptists. And these and so these three were kind of the major movements that came out of that. And then in the 500 years since then, there's been so many sorts of things. So the Church of England is created out of Catholicism because King James wanted to get remarried after divorce, and the Pope wouldn't let him, so they created their own sorts of things. That's why it happened. Right. And then you've got the missionary movement of John Wesley in America, and it kind of its own his own group kind of formed out of that. And then, over the course of the last several hundred years, and the last 100 specifically, of just this difference is enough that we should be different. Sometimes it's political, sometimes it's regional. I mean, there were several church denominations that were started that had a Northern Baptist and a Southern Baptist because of
just where they were at the time.
Well, yeah, and issues that were dividing the North and South in the mid 19th
So that was
century.
American, specific.
Yeah, and so most the Southern, everybody know that there are Northern Baptists.
Are there?
Yeah, and now Southern Baptists are everywhere, including the North, and that distinction being a regional distinction. Sometimes it's regional, sometimes it's political. Like there's a church called the Evangelical Free Church. Which is a church that existed in a country where there was a state-sponsored Christianity, but we don't want to be part of state-sponsored, so we're going to be
that's what's hardest to wrap my mind around.
And so we've got all these different things, and so they kind of spread from, again, your main division of Catholics and Orthodox, and a little bit of Coptics here in Egypt.
Coptics,
yeah, sure. Just keep going. And then the Protestant Reformation that comes a few hundred years later built three new movements, and out of those three movements, every other thing is kind of flowed out of.
There is no other big massive other thing up until now. Where we're at.
Those are the
big staple
the
moments.
Episcopals and the Anglicans would definitely want to make sure that I bring attention to the fact that was birthed out of the fact that the king wanted to get divorced and the Pope wouldn't let him. So they separated from the
that's another
Catholic
country.
Church. And then, and then the Methodists, John Wesley was just a little too intense for them. And so Methodism, I think, is kind of birthed out of that. And so then you got the groups that were kind of fleeing the Church of England to come to America because they didn't quite agree with everything that was happening there. And then a lot of the American denominations get started out of that. So again, a lot of it since then is political, regional, minor theological, but they mostly extend from the huge break between East-West, the Protestants and the Catholics, and then you just add in what happened with the Anglicans and the Church of England.
Right.
Everything is just kind of then flowed from that.
Okay.
And so this will just be our intro course.
That was fun.
That has just sparked 1,000 different questions and has not gotten us anywhere near what the way all the different churches are structured and how those things work. But that was just at least a brief history of denominations that I'm sure more than anything has inspired you to beg me to do a church history podcast. So
that's interesting though.
Yep. So
all right.
You seem to really enjoy that.
I did.
That
Well,
was nice.
I'm a history. That was my minor in college, and I love it.
Did you take that book out of my office? The denominational book? Did you
Maybe.
I think you did. Anyways.
But I didn't connect that to being a church history book.
Yeah, we'll pull some church history books out. There's some really good ones.
That's just so interesting how it connects with the political or regional and like cultural differences. Like there's so much that impact those different movements that happened.
Yep.
So I just find it really fascinating.
Yeah, and we didn't even really get into kind of where the Pentecostal and
right,
like charismatic movements kind of come from that. I mean, there's again that would be, I'm sitting here. I should have mentioned that because a lot of that comes from that too, kind of from the first and second Great Awakenings. And you mean, hey, what is that?
George Whitefield or whatever.
So, anyways,
fascinating. This is my favorite episode so far.
Wow, I like that. All right, so we'll see what we do to keep this going.
Okay.
And thanks for joining us, Abigail. Thanks for being such an enthusiastic learner.
Yeah, man.
And thank you for joining us. You can find out more about our church at thegrovechurch.org. We'd love to connect with you in any way that we can. Any questions, any ideas that you have beyond just church history, which I feel like I'm getting pinned into by the second here for future series. We'd love to hear it. And thanks for joining us. So we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to the Cultivate podcast. Our hope is that you are taking steps to go deeper in your faith, that you are asking big questions and you're looking for answers. We hope that we can be a resource for you through our podcast and any other way that we can help you. You can find all our episodes anywhere that you can find podcasts, including YouTube. And again, thank you so much for joining us.